Today on Empowering Workplaces, we're going to be talking about how you can be a badass leader and a good human with Urs Koenig, a military peacekeeping commander, ultra endurance champion, keynote speaker, and best-selling author of Radical Humility. Be a badass leader and a good human. Welcome to Empowering Workplaces, a show for anyone who wants to make work better and more fulfilling. We're your hosts, organizational psychologist Sanya Lucina
and aspiring leader Guille Santana. Join us in today's inspiring conversation.
Urs, welcome to Empowering Workplaces. It is such a pleasure to have you on the show. Welcome. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you, Sanya, and thank you, Gia, for having me. It's a great pleasure and an honor. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's so wonderful. I think we saw it was a post on LinkedIn by another one of your fans before your book even came out that it's forthcoming. And even after seeing the title, Guy and I looked and we said, we have to read this book. We have to have Ursan. It's just such an incredible message. And so we prepared a lot of questions for you and there's just so much we want to know. Before we jump into our conversation, can you share a little bit about yourself with us and our listeners?
Absolutely. So me in a nutshell, I love people and I love results. So that's the title of my book, right? So that's truly who I am. I have a very eclectic background. I was an academic. I actually wrote a PhD in geography on climate change impact research many years ago. I was a collegiate level cross-country skier in my home country of Switzerland. I was then in management consulting after my academic career for a while, and then in leadership development as an executive coach over the last 25 years. I've deployed on 2 military peacekeeping missions, the first one in 2017 and then the last one 2 years ago. And now I primarily speak. So that's me in a nutshell. I'm the loving dad of 2 teenage boys who, as I always like to say, make commanding soldiers look easy. So there you have it.
Oh, well, with that kind of background, I feel like you've lived many lifetimes. And I would have to say with your last statement about the teenage boys, I have a soon-to-be 6-year-old, and I'm adoring him right now for the little human being that he is, because I know it gets a lot more complicated the older they get. So in a few years, I might call you for, this time we're talking about workforce tips. I might call you about some parenting ones in some years.
Well, actually, a lot of the lessons also apply to parenting, but that is probably, another conversation.
But good to know. That's very good to know. So I love that you said that, you wrote a PhD. So with some foreshadowing, you've gone through the research and publishing a manuscript. But I think today writing a book, it's it's art and science, because it's a lot around research. It's a lot around putting, big ideas on paper in a way to really engage your audience. And then it's out there having conversations like this and making sure that after you do all that work, it reaches as many people as possible who it could have a positive impact on. And so it's really moving a mountain. It's huge for anyone that I have a PhD. I have not written a book after that, but I can only imagine how much work it is. And so with that, what inspired you at this point in time to write about humility in leadership? What was that tipping point that said, yes, I am ready to take on all this work now?
Right. Well, and you're absolutely right, of course. I mean, writing a book is a huge endeavor. And, people now call me a lot and want tips and tricks on how to best write a book. And the one thing I would say about that before I come to the humility is opportunity costs are real. Like, you don't do other stuff when you write a book. So anyway, but why now? So I've been told for years, you should write a book. And honestly, the cynic in me went, I don't need to write another book that says the same thing and nobody's going to read it anyway, right? I mean, honestly, right? There's so much leadership stuff out there. But my interest in humility really evolved over the years. So let me just go back a little bit and then tell you what really crystallized the decision to write the book. I've always been drawn to humble people. In my ultra cycling, career, I was drawn to people who let their legs do the talking versus the big mouth, right? And so then, as an executive coach, as we came out of the financial crisis, social media started to explode. I experienced my clients as always being a couple of steps behind, and a lot of them were still leading top-down command control. And so that sort of, loosely got me interested in this humble leadership approach that some people started to talk about. And of course, Jim Collins in 2000 first talked about this in Good to Great. And two things happened. I deployed on my 2 peacekeeping missions, as I said, to the Balkans in 2017 and 2020 in the Middle East for a year. And COVID happened. So the peacekeeping missions, to my surprise, going back in a top-down command control culture, what we think of as a military being, I experienced my best commanders, my best military leaders were deeply humble, deep self-aware, build strong relationships in the military, deployed a growth mindset. And then, of course, COVID happened. And when COVID happened, we all had to humbly admit that, we have very little control, that we actually don't know what the future holds up to the highest office in this country, right? And so then when I came back 2.5 years ago from my peacekeeping mission, I said, you know what? Now I have a unique lens. Through my peacekeeping work, I'm going to write the book or a book on humble leadership. And I wanted it to be personal. And so nobody can tell my story. Research-based, as we talked in the green room earlier, and highly actionable. And so I did feel then I can make a contribution with a unique voice through the lens in large parts of military peacekeeping, but not only, drawing on different experiences of my life as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I love that you mentioned the military because to me, I don't have personal military experience. But as an outsider, I would think, yeah, it's very much top down and it's very much like you're going to be very tough on people. And there's probably not that much room for humility. And so I hope that those stories really challenge some of the more traditional ways of thinking, because that's, one of the things that I keep thinking about after the pandemic. The pandemic, I think, changed us in many ways. And I remember having conversations with so many of my friends and colleagues and just thinking like, I really hope that after we're out of it, we don't forget the good things that we've learned. Unfortunately, I'm also a psychologist and I know some of the learned behaviors and unlearning behaviors and circumstances. And so there was a part of me who was an optimist and a part of me that was still worried that some things we're going to forget. And I think not to a huge extent, but I am seeing that a little bit when it comes to leadership. So one of the things that really grabbed me was the title of your book. And I'm sure that was very intentional because looking at, being a badass and a good human. And for me personally, I've been a leader for some decades, and it's something I aspire to always. I want to be a good human first. I want my teams, my colleagues, when they remember me or when they talk about me to say, Sonia really had good intentions. I can be a badass. I think I can, maybe do a little bit better at that and be firmer. But when I think about, in your book, you even mentioned vulnerability and saying that many leaders still view vulnerability as a weakness and they believe they need to have all the answers. And you follow up that with also saying that, being nice maybe doesn't always in people's mind mix with good leadership. And I'm seeing for better or worse, LinkedIn is probably one of the places where I follow a lot of different leaders and where I'm getting, maybe some anecdotal research, like not like very highly rigorous and academic, but I'm looking at what some of these bigger voices are saying. And I'm almost feeling like there's a little bit of a sense of a divide, like that there's still maybe leaders like us that are saying, there is place for heart and there is place for being a good human. But that there's also people who are vocal and are saying like, no, like there's no room for this in the workplace. Like we need to produce results and you need to, put everything to the side and show up and get your job. Like that's why we're paying you. And so I think, in your work, there are probably plenty of people who subscribe to our way of leadership, to our, having humility and leading that way. But I would still love to believe that for those who don't, there are some ways that we can change their mind, or there's some ways that we can open up their mind to maybe considering a different approach, that it doesn't have to be a trade-off. And so in your interactions with people, whether it's in your coaching, whether it's in your speeches, maybe it's anecdotal, maybe it's somebody just challenging you, when you encounter somebody that has a different mindset, what does that conversation usually look like? Like, what are some ways that I have Adam Grant in the back of my mind, and, his book Think Again, that says, like, don't try to like rebut people necessarily. It's not the best way to change your mind. But what are some ways that you would recommend to our listeners, maybe if they have a leader that's more closed-minded, or they want to make a change inside their organization, to change somebody's perspective that maybe thinks it's really, more black and white, that you have to be firm and there's not much room to be nice?
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, the first thing I would say is that, this notion that we either have to be a tough leader or a good human. And by the way, a good human and being nice are not necessarily the same thing. That's a
Yeah.
false dichotomy, right? So
Mhm.
we can be deeply humble. And, what I mean by humble leadership, deep self-awareness. I know we'll talk about that in a minute. So
Mhm.
me being self-aware, me knowing my strengths and weaknesses, that's not being weak. That's not driving for results.
Mhm.
Me building strong relationships with my team members, getting to know them really on a personal level, and not just cogs that get stuffed in the wheel that get stuffed on for me. That's not being weak or not driving for results. And then, the third pillar, the famous psychological safety, of course, based on Amy
Mhm.
Edmondson's work, that's not being weak. So when I encounter these conversations, I make the business case. There's two things.
Mhm.
The VUCA world, the complex, fast-moving, deeply interconnected world, doesn't the heroic leadership, top-down command control doesn't cut it anymore, because you're too slow. If you're the leader on top of the org chart who needs all the decision, all the information flow up to him or her, and then they make the decision all on their own, they're always too slow. By the time it leaves my desk, it's an iteration or two behind. So we need empowered execution at the front lines. I know that's a buzzword, but that's what
Mhm.
humble leadership drives to
Mhm.
do. I need to build strong relationships with my team members so they can execute at the front lines. And so the world requires it. The workforce requires it. All the research shows Gen Zs thrive on strong relationships. A lot of other things too. A recent Glassdoor survey stated that they Gen Zs, more than 2/3 of Gen Zs value a strong relationship culture over money. They want to be heard and seen as whole human beings. And so, and we can talk. I have some myths in my book around you can't be confident and humble, you can't be ambitious and
Mhm.
humble. And I mean, I dismantle those as well. If I can, I'm
Yeah.
happy doing that right now. So, what does it really mean to be humble and confident? I have to be fundamentally having a strong sense of self to humbly ask for feedback. If I'm already insecure about myself, I'm not going to go and ask my team members what I can do better. So I need to be fundamentally confident to show up with humility. So it's not a contradiction, but it goes hand in hand. And the same with ambition. What does ambition look like? Asking hard questions. Why are we failing? Or why we're not successful as we could be? What's my part in this? And that's big, humble questions we need to ask. But only if we ask those humble questions can we actually achieve. And so it really, and just to be clear, I'm not advocating for humble leadership because we want to be nice or liked.
Yeah.
I advocate for it because there is a clear business case over and over showing that a more bottom-up, human-centered leadership approach actually produces better results. So it's not a coincidence that I talk about badass and good human.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Urs, you talked about asking humble questions, and you highlight a lot the value of feedback and doing the work to discover your blind spots in your book. And 360 feedback is a huge area for us at Question Pro. Can you tell us more about why you believe that a key characteristic of being a humble leader is asking for feedback?
Mm-hmm. So, it's one of the three legs of the stool of humble leadership, right? So deep self-awareness, which, what does that look like? That looks like I see myself in line with how others see me, right? And so as 360, we're all familiar, and I know you offer 360s, as my understanding actually. So this is the go-to tool, and it sometimes goes out of fashion and then comes back, and so it still is a strong tool. But seeing myself in line with how others see me, and another part of self-awareness, I talk about this the humility to know that I can't do everything, but I can do almost anything I put my mind to. So the value of focus, saying no, I have a bunch of tools in the book, stop doing lists, and the 4Ds and whatnot. So the self-awareness, seeing myself in line with how others see me, and then the humility to say no and realize that I'm spreading myself too thinly. I have to actually cut things off. And the research is crystal clear. Self-aware leaders build better relationships, communicate more effectively. They also are more likely to get promoted. I mean, there's numerous peer-reviewed studies, and their businesses are more profitable. So there's a clear business case for self-awareness. And just to round that one out, the way I think about increasing our self-awareness, it's an iterative process. We go out into the world, we do a 360, or we ask our team members, when's the last time during a one-on-one we asked, hey, Sonia, what do I do well as your manager? What can I do better? My challenge to all of us is incorporate this regularly into your one-on-one at the end of each one-on-one, so it doesn't become that scary thing that you do once a year and everybody's freaking out about it. So regularly train that feedback muscle. But then, so that's out into the world. And then introspection, however this looks like, journaling, talking to a trusted friend, a coach potentially, and processing the feedback that comes back. Because leadership, humble leadership, is not a popularity contest. I always ask, I always listen, I always thank, but I decide what I'm doing with the feedback. So that's a long answer to the question, Guya, but that's where I'm at with self-awareness. It's an absolute crucial part of becoming a humble leader.
And I think there's so much more, like, as a society that we can do, because I think, to your point, there's almost two steps. The first one is understanding the value and understanding that not a single one of us can fully understand at all times how others see us, even with the best intentions, right? Even if we're doing what we care about others and we want to do the right thing, and we want, without having that conversation, it's nearly impossible, if not impossible, to really know how all of those around us are experiencing us. And I remember, to me, my first like, when I faced with that was actually with a college roommate. And I remember something was going on, and she said, Sonia, you have no idea how what you did made me feel. And I thought, no, I didn't. Like, and I don't, at this point, I don't remember what the situation was, but I remember her saying that to me. And I thought, my goodness, whatever I did that made her feel badly, my intentions were the opposite of that. And how good is it for me to know that intentions versus outcome can be so different, and how important it is to have that conversation. And I'm forever indebted to her for actually proactively saying that, because that's even more difficult. It's not like I asked her, like, hey, how was it? And it wasn't even a work situation. But as a very young person, it opened up my eyes to that difference between intentions and perceptions. And I think that, the other point that you make that's really important is, so first, we need to understand the value. The second one is we need to incorporate it in a part of what we do. And in a world that everything feels like it moves so fast, we need to continue to remember ourselves the value of it. Because if we don't remind ourselves of that, we will have those quick one-on-ones, and we'll go through our projects and we'll go through our agendas. But to me, something that I've been talking a lot about with the team is, making sure we continue to have that solid foundation. So there's a misunderstanding about something. If I'm, for example, working with Guy and I keep doing things that I'm like, oh, I'm doing this to help her growth and development and this, and Guy's like, Sonia, stop it. This is not helping me. But we're not having that conversation. All the best intentions are going to lead to, something that that's not the outcome that we want, but all that energy could have been redirected to something so much better. So I think sometimes knowing and actually doing, very much like eating healthy and exercise, there's somewhat like two different two different steps. One is awareness, and the other one is execution.
No, I mean, you make an excellent point. So, really incorporating that and getting during our one-on-ones, our time is our most valuable currency as leaders that we can give to our people. And, and we can do this in our personal lives too. I actually ask my boys, my teenage boys, on a regular basis, what can I do better as your dad? It doesn't mean I'm, I wasn't, born yesterday. They're teenagers. I'm not going to do everything they tell me, but incorporating that, now I did this. We talked earlier about the leadership in the military. I did something very similar with my team, where once every 2 weeks, we had a team meeting with no other agenda, and sometimes it lasted 10 minutes, sometimes it lasted 2 hours, then what's going on for everybody, what's rubbing people the wrong way. So, an exchange of how we're actually working together. So that rather than content, we talked about process. How are we interacting with each other? What's working? What's not working? And so, even in the military, we do these things because it prevents the small things from becoming big things, right? I mean, that is basically, you nip it in the bud early. There you go.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I took a note of that because one of the things that we do in our team is we have weekly learning sessions. So we don't have a huge team, but we have a very diverse team, especially when it comes to content knowledge. So we have engineers and we have marketing and we have sales, like everything, customer success, everything that takes a business to run. And so we do these ongoing sessions to continue to have awareness of what everybody's doing, what's new in our business. However, we don't have what you just talked about. We don't have, I think to repurpose one of those sessions once a month and have this conversation instead, I think would be really, really valuable. So thank you for that. I took a note to make sure.
But I'm glad it's helpful, but I also love what you're doing, like these learning sessions. I feel very passionate about that. Have your people shadow other people, because then you understand what's going on versus just get frustrated. Like, why doesn't this work, right? So it's super cool that you do that. I love that. That's excellent.
Thank you. Well, pretty early on in my career, I went in as a PhD with a very heavy academic background and was fortunate enough to start running a team. And as a part of that team, I had technology development and sales. And I mean, how very different.
Yeah.
And so what do I do? What do I do? It's like, okay, they each need to understand each other's lives and not only what they do for work, but what their drivers are and how they get measured and the different pressures, or else this is never going to work. So I've definitely carried on over, few decades of work. Okay, we all need to understand each other as well as possible. That's the goal.
Right.
So you mentioned some misconceptions about what humble leadership is in our conversation. And one of the things that, jumped out at me, I have so many quotes from your book, the amount of, things that I highlighted is rather surreal. And so one of the things that you said is humble leadership does not mean adding more to your to-do list. In fact, it might mean taking things off. And I think about some of this, traditional definition of success and leadership, and it's kind of like a land grab. How much more can I do? How many more departments can I run? How many people do I have reporting to me? But to your point, being humble, it doesn't mean taking on so much. And to your earlier point, it doesn't mean you can do everything. It means you can do anything, but you've really got to pick. And so can you tell us a little bit, when you work, whether it's again in your speaking engagements or when you work one-on-one with your clients, when you have somebody with some of those kinds of tendencies, how do you pull them back from wanting to do it all, to realizing that that's not necessarily always a definition of success?
Right. So I think the first thing, if they're in a leadership position, thinking about this. So the true test of leadership is how the ship runs when you're not there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I actually challenge my clients to make themselves obsolete, literally work themselves out of a job. So I want to know, Sonia, how the ship runs when you're offline for 4 weeks, right? Just as an example, right? So have I built up systems and procedures, and have I built up my people so they can, do the day-to-day running of the business by themselves? And so, as as human beings, as leaders in particular, we want to be needed. We secretly yearn to be asked for a lot of approval on decisions. We like to make decisions. We like to be busy. Why? It makes us feel important, right?
Mhm.
And so we really have to consciously fight that desire and that yearn and work ourselves out of a job. And I have some very tactical tools: the stop doing lists, the 4Ds, do, delegate, diarize, dump, like various frameworks and tools you can apply to focus on really only what only you can do. Right. So that's it. And this is, I realize, by the way, it's very easy to talk about this on a podcast. I get it. I've been there. Right. And so, but even in small teams, I get pushback sometimes. Well, I only have a team of 5. Even in a team of 5, ask yourself for everything that comes across your desk: who else can do this? Who else can make that decision? Right. And then push decision making as deep down as you possibly can, so that you can really focus on the big picture. In the military, by the way, we often talk about this. As a leader, you can't have a job. In a crisis situation, in a tactical operations center, when a crisis happens, if you're the commanding officer, you don't have a task. Your task is to make sure everybody can do their task. Yeah. Does that make sense? So if you're bogged down in, looking at the map or doing a tactical or making a tactical decision, you're losing track of the big picture. So I often think about that when I myself get bogged down in the day-to-day stuff with my team.
Yeah, my first leader, I remember she told me, only do what only you can do. Amen. And that stayed in the back of my mind. And again, sometimes it's easier than others. But one exercise that I do, it's not 4 weeks, but it's 2. Every summer, my family and I take a 2-week holiday. I'm fortunate that my parents are still young enough that they can get around, and we travel through Europe. And Gia can attest to this. Like, every year I prepare my team as if I'm never coming back. I'm like, I'm not going to take any meetings. In case of emergency, send me a WhatsApp, but you can all help each other. And I very much go towards that. Like, yes, you can find me if it's urgent, but I'm not that like, oh, Slack me anytime and email me. No, like, pretend I don't exist unless it's something really urgent. And I think it also sets a good example for the team to know when they take time off, them to do the same thing. I think it's, trying to lead by example.
Oh, I think that's wonderful. And that's admirable that you do that. And you're exactly right. I wanted to say that, like, you're modeling for your team what you want them to do as well. So it's brilliant.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. Don't let me fool you. I'm not always successful at it, but those 2 weeks I do great. I set a really good example during that time.
Well, Urs, as you know, the title of this podcast is Empowering Workplaces. So we have to ask you, what can organizations do to help develop, and nurture and empower humble leaders?
Well, I actually get asked this quite a bit. So I'm not an OD person, right? I'm not an organizational psychologist. But of course, right, there is things that organizations can and are doing that can foster a more humble leadership approach. So, how do we structure our leadership development? Pixar actually does a wonderful job at incorporating some of these humble leadership principles into their leadership development. How are our performance reviews run, right? Do we assess humble leadership behaviors in our appraisals? Do we pay people, talk about salaries? Do we financially reward some of the behaviors we want to see? And then, of course, are we hiring for that as well? And so, my book is, I'm already very clear about this. It's not an OD book, but there's no question that integrating some of these humble leadership behaviors systematically into the structure of the organization is, a very powerful way to turn the ship around. And, the one thing I would say, though, is that nothing beats the top person modeling that sort of behavior. I talk about a bunch of humble leaders, Jacinda Ardern, former Prime Minister of New Zealand, who was a very tough leader during the Christchurch terrorist attack, during the COVID crisis, but on many occasions showed up with vulnerability about her life outside of governing the country. She shared what it was like to give birth while holding the highest office in the country. and it propelled her to rock star status and built huge public trust. So there's a number of people, Microsoft, Satya Nadella. I mean, he's a badass leader, but he's deeply humble, curious, learning, growth mindset, an integral part of the curriculum at Microsoft. So the power of leaders at the top, and even if you're not at the top, but the power you have in modeling as a first-time supervisor to your immediate team, like, let's not underestimate that, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think everything that you said, it's not something that'll happen by chance. It has to be important to the organization. And you have to look at that whole cycle of, are we bringing those people in? Are we letting them use that as a strength? Are we letting them use that in their jobs? Are we asking that of them? Because you can bring in humble individuals, but then if their targets and what the organization values after that is different, you start to have a little bit of this conflict of, who am I and how do I actually show up as that? So one of the favorite pieces of advice that you also give in your book is for people to be tough on results, but tender on people. So I think that this is an interesting and important balance for somebody listening to this. I could imagine they would ask, well, but how can I differentiate? How can I differentiate if this one person is missing something? How can I be tough on results? So can you give us just a couple of examples, like real life ones, if a manager or leader is listening to us and saying, I'd love to follow that, but I don't know if I'm following that today, and how can I be doing better?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually going to answer that with a super quick anecdote. So I was deployed in Kosovo, and my boss, my commander, called me to his office, and he opened the conversation with these words. He said, Urs, I love you. You know I do. And this is nowhere near good enough. I love you, and your work sucks, basically. It's not good enough. So I shrank in my chair. Yeah. If he would have yelled at me, if he would have belittled me, I would have tuned him out. And I would have not heard the message of the work is not good enough. So by God, I, for the next 9 months, turned myself inside out to deliver only the very best quality of work to his desk, because I know he truly cared about me as a human and as his teammate. And so that's how tough on results and tender on people looks. Now, to make it sort of operational for all of us, we all fall on the spectrum of, really tough on results. These are the no-nonsense hard drivers over here. And then on the other side of the spectrum are the people who are always concerned about how everybody else feels, and they don't ever correct anything because they don't want to upset anybody. So we all fall somewhere on the spectrum here. So let's ask ourselves, where do I fall? Am I more naturally tough on results, or am I more naturally tender on people? And then challenge yourself to move from or to and. So if, for example, you're somebody who is naturally tough on results, what's one act of tender on people you can do? It could be saying thank you. It could be a gift. It could be a thank you note. It could be any of these things. So it could be asking somebody about how their weekend was, like as mundane and small as that. So basically, what's one act on tender on people? And then if you're naturally tender on people, what's one tough feedback that you haven't given that you need to give? So how can you move in the other direction a little bit? So that's some practical things we can do. And hey, it's a thinking person sport, leadership. This isn't easy, right? It's a thinking person sport for a good reason, but I can hold my people to the highest standards and still have meaningful and trusting relationships with them. I can say, I love you, and this is not good enough. It's absolutely doable. I don't have to yell at them. I don't have to, call them names or anything like that.
Yeah, you're right. And I think those are the times when it resonates the most. It's almost when you first started talking about that, I was remembering the conversations where the word disappointed comes up. And that is the worst word when somebody says, I'm so disappointed. Like, I feel like it's always heartbreaking because it's usually somebody that really cares about you and you've let them down. And so I get like, I literally am getting goosebumps even saying that. I'm not advocating to use that word, but I think it goes along those lines where it's like, I care about you so much as a human. We've just got to get this right. Like we're not and so you're not telling somebody they're stupid. You're not calling them lazy. You're not tying it to their person.
And that's I mean, I actually know, and the beauty about the disappointment language is I use I language. I'm disappointed. You can never argue with my feelings.
Yeah,
right? And so
true.
This is the tough part, right? So, but to be clear, sometimes the most loving thing I can do is let somebody go. We're very clear about this. Very clear. So that's sometimes the best thing, the most loving thing I can do for that person, for myself and the team, because the team is watching. The team is always watching how I put up with subpar performance, right? And so, that's exactly right. You don't have to be, excuse my French, you don't have to be a jerk in order to be tough on results. Absolutely not.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I do, I'll reiterate one more point and now let Guy start to wrap us up. I think that you're right that a lot of times people are on that spectrum and you tend to gravitate towards one or the other. And I think maybe a lot of us know which one we gravitate towards. And if we don't, that's a great place to get some feedback on and then start to work from the other way. Because I think finding yourself with that good balance does not necessarily come natural to everyone. To some, I think it does. But I think a lot of times, again, one of those extremes is where we tend to be, understanding where we are one, and then starting to build that into our interactions with different people. And maybe sometimes our team members are going to be surprised because they're so used to us being one way or the other. So it's a little bit of maybe being transparent too, like, hey, like, I love our team. This is really important. But I think we need to change some things to make sure that we're hitting our targets. Let's think about what we need to do differently, and to just prepare them that it's a shift, but it's also a shift that's good for them because it's part of that growth. Being tough on results oftentimes gives people additional ideas for how they can succeed. They're not being protected almost as a child. We're like, oh, I don't want to tell you anything bad. I don't want to hurt your feelings. Even though even with kids, we know we need to be transparent in a very conscientious way. But thank you for that, because I do think a lot of our listeners will wonder how to balance that. And I think it's such an important thing to work on and to iterate on until we get in a good place.
I know we need to wrap, but I wanted to just follow up on one thing
Yeah.
there actually, which is beautiful. So obviously it's a self-awareness. We just talked about that. Where do I fall? And then what you said, being open to the team that I'm working on making a shift. I'm working on, moving in the other direction. So what does that show to my team? It shows I too am work in progress as a leader. I too am looking at improving. And so that's exactly what I mean when I talk about appropriate vulnerability. I set goals for myself to get better, and I model the same for my team members. So I think that's excellent. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, as our conversation today reaches a close, what final advice would you give to our listeners?
You mean other than read my book? Just kidding.
That's a great piece of advice.
Where can they find it?
Yeah, well, it's on Amazon and wherever books are sold. So, I've done a lot of podcasts now about the book, and what comes up consistently is simply this: just ask. Just ask. So this is just ask for feedback. My team, that's improved my self-awareness. What can I do better? What do I do well at the end of every one-on-one? And also, in terms of building meaningful relationships with my people, just ask them about, where do you have your career aspirations? Where do you want to be? Or learn about their personal lives in an appropriate way. Learn about them as whole human beings. Just ask. So that's it in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Urs. It's, again, a brilliant book, a wonderful conversation. Thank you for all that you're bringing to our society, to the message that you're carrying, and just, again, very practical ways that I think people can not only find this aspirational, but also inspirational and know how to actually get to where they want to be if they want to be a different kind of leader or continue to be a more humble leader. So thank you so much again for your time today, for sharing everything with our listeners. And we look forward to continuing to follow your story and be your biggest champs. And if you are listening to this podcast, I would highly recommend reading the book. I could not put it down. And any of you that have heard me speak before, I've read probably thousands of books at this point. So I'd say definitely grab this one. It's a must read.
Thanks very much for having me. It was really fun, Sonia and Guya. Thank you.